It would come to be called Fordlandia. 2.5 million acres of virgin rainforest, the size of Connecticut, in the heart of the Amazon. And almost as soon as Henry Ford had wired the $125,000 that made him the sole owner of this vast tract of jungle, he began transforming it.
The Ford Motor Company is ever seeking ways and materials to improve its products. One of the latest enterprises of the company is the development of a rubber plantation in Brazil.
Rubber for tires was his stated purpose. But as with many things concerning Ford, there was a grander vision. In the primordial wilderness, he planned to build a modern utopia modeled on small-town America.
He came to believe that he was not only an economic entrepreneur, but a prophet of proper living.
Henry says simple, plain, honest, hardworking people. That's the backbone of not just the United States, it's the backbone of the world. And I know how you have to live in order to achieve that.
Ford practiced what he preached. Through his own fierce determination, he had risen from obscurity to become one of the most famous and powerful men in the country. With the Model T, the most successful car in history, and the groundbreaking $5 a day wage, Ford ushered in the modern world.
The Model T greatly expanded Americans' mobility, knitting America very close together at the same time that it opened Americans' sense of what was possible. So he liberated, at the individual level, the human spirit.
Henry Ford was a revolutionary. He changed all of 20th century America. We're living in Henry Ford's world right now.
But no matter his success, Ford remained restless and driven, always seeking to control what lay just beyond his grasp. The creator of an urban industrial age, he longed for the simpler era he had helped destroy. One of the nation's richest men, he despised the wealthy and feared a vast conspiracy threatened to bring him down. A hero to many ordinary Americans, he battled his workers and bullied those who looked up to him, including his only son.
What is it like to carry around so much power that the ordinary wear and tear of reality that most of us deal with all the time that keep us pretty sane is absent?
I'm David Schwartz. I'm the chief cryptographer at Ripple. Presentation is on enabling the Internet of Value, by which we mean being able to move value as easily as we move information. So what is this blockchain thing that we're all so excited about? Well, it's a new technology that presented itself as Bitcoin. And I think we see an analogy with the first developments of other technologies, where there was just some product that embodied that technology. But as the technology matured, we got different designs aimed at different use cases. We have, in the analogy, we have a vehicle for moving heavy objects. We have a vehicle that's more of like a sports car, and so on. So the design focused on the use case rather than just one design that fits every use case. Right now, we have something like 1,500 blockchain-based tokens, and they're fighting over what use cases they're focused on, whether it's payments, trade finance, whatever use case. And we looked at a number of use cases for blockchains, including things like securities trading, lending, smart contracts, insurance, and a long list of them. And one of the things that we discovered is that all of those use cases come back to payments. If you're borrowing money, someone's going to pay you that money after you borrowed it. If it's trade finance, there's going to be a movement of money. If there's a smart contract, very often that smart contract is controlling the movement of money. So in all of those cases, there's a value transfer. Ripple has become focused on that value transfer that we need for those other use cases.
Innovation. It has been the fuel for mankind's greatest achievements, propelling us to unprecedented heights, carrying us through the most challenging of times, and creating the technologies of our future. Without it, we would not be sitting here, watching this, moments away from learning just how innovation has been the lifeblood of the automotive business. And there is no place on this entire planet more influential to the General Motors story than right here in Flint, Michigan. Oh, the good old days, when 4 beaver pelts got you a gallon of brandy. At this time, Flint was a nameless, undeveloped wilderness, yet still received just as many visitors as Michigan's 2 bustling cities, Detroit and Saginaw. You see, trappers and traders used the rivers to get to markets down here, and this was the southernmost exit of Michigan's water highway. One of these traders was Jacob Smith, and he saw something others didn't in this land: opportunity. Like an off-ramp convenience store, he built the first trading post on this soil, giving traders a chance to sell their pelts while traveling half the distance. Some say he was Flint's first innovator. With the increase of trade came an increase of residents, businesses, and industries. No longer was it a frontier. Flint was now a destination. Before oil, lumber was the resource that fueled the growth of the nation, and Flint was covered in it. This city was built on the backs of lumberjacks, and business was booming. But the lumber barons' thirst for riches outgrew their resources, and eventually, the industry came to a halt. Despite the collapse, Josiah Bagol, a lumber titan, had no intention of leaving his home in Flint and all that he had built here. Instead, he had a breakthrough idea. With mills standing idle, wood craftsmen in need of work, and a growing population demanding transportation, he was going to repurpose his resources in a new industry, the carriage industry. Bagol was back in business under a new name, the Flint Wagon Works. But he wasn't alone, and soon enough, Flint became the mecca of the carriage industry, aptly earning it the name Vehicle City. In fact, the world's largest and most influential carriage maker got their start here, and it all began with this little road cart. Like a high schooler showing off their new wheels, Johnny Alger proudly rolled up to greet his 2 pals. The ringleader, Billy Durant, was a born wizard of marketing and sales, and his right-hand man, J. Dallas Dort, had incredible business sense and was a man of the people.
Wow, swell ride there, Johnny. Mind if I get a lift downtown? Hop on, fella. Sure that thing is safe? Don't be silly. It rides like a dream.
Johnny wasn't kidding. This suspension was otherworldly. Durant had never seen anything like it. But he did see the opportunity of a lifetime. One day later, Durant was in front of the manufacturer purchasing the patent to his cart design. The very next day, he asked his good friend Dort to go into business with him as partners. They didn't know it then, but this day would change the course of history. Meanwhile, in Detroit, Dave Buick is revealing one of his latest inventions. Shh, let's watch.
Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the sink in a tub.
Over the last 25 years, Buick had been perfecting his skills in the plumbing industry, filing patents for valves, mechanical linkages, and pipe designs. Only hindsight would reveal just how important this experience was. Not for making toilets, but gasoline engines. Back in Flint, the Durant Dort Carriage Company was growing by leaps and bounds. Dort ran the day-to-day operations of managing production, the workforce, and expanding facilities to meet the growing demand. Aside from selling and promoting, Durant was busy creating a variety of cart makes and models that appealed to every class and any budget, a revolutionary idea at the time. They had a luxury line, utility vehicles, even sport carts, all of which had a seemingly endless amount of available options. It wasn't just 3 trim levels here. You could swap out wheels, paint, springs, axles, seats, stitching, compartments, even horsewhip holders. Needless to say, reliable parts suppliers were essential to the fragile balance of the carriage industry. Any disruption in their production could have devastating effects. It wasn't long before suppliers got wise to the industry's complete reliance on their parts. And so they formed trusts, fixing and raising the prices of their parts nationwide. The industry began to panic. In the midst of the madness, Dort had to step down from his position in order to be with his ailing wife. In Dort's absence, a man named ABC Hardy stepped up to take over the daunting task of manning the company's helm during this dark and turbulent time. But there was hope, and Durant unveiled a plan to fight the trusts. The concept was to just buy the part suppliers' businesses, bring their operations to Flint, and here they would exclusively make all the parts for the Durant Dort Carriage Company, and at cost. This was the very invention of vertical integration. Although the plan worked, after 2 years of endless struggle, bargaining, and travel, ABC Hardy was a shell of his former self. Tired and weary, he needed a break. Some R&R was well-deserved, and so Durant sent him off to Paris! Aside from discovering his love for Bordeaux, it was here that he saw the full scale of the automobile boom. In Europe, they were years ahead of America in automobile manufacturing, and Hardy saw the future, and more importantly, dollar signs. Filled with excitement, Hardy came back to Flint and tried to convince Durant to start manufacturing automobiles with him. To his dismay, Durant had zero interest. No. But Hardy was set on building an automobile, and if his employers were not going to support him, he would do it on his own. He sold his shares in the company and went back to Europe. For the next 11 months, Hardy took every opportunity he could find to study these automobiles. And when he made it back to Flint in 1902, ABC Hardy became the first automobile manufacturer in the city, and a year before Henry Ford. His vehicle, the Flint Roadster, was lighter, faster, and cheaper than any other commercial automobile available. He was off to a great start, having sold 52 in less than a year. This was beginning to get some nationwide attention from not only anxious buyers, but also the Selden Patent henchmen. The Selden Patent, at this point, long held the rights to a gasoline-powered engine design, and therefore, anyone who created even a similar design owed the Selden boys their dues. Hardy was looking at 52 counts of breaking the law and was taken to court. He took a devastating loss, and a very angry Hardy packed his bags and started a new life in the West. Flint lost the beginning of a great vehicle manufacturer, but the automobile gold rush was well on its way, with or without Hardy. For the past 3 years, Dave Buick had invested all of his profits and knowledge from the plumbing industry into the experimentation of gasoline engines. And with the help of employees Walter Marr and Eugene Richard, he would bring to the market a game-changing new engine. They called it the valve-in-head engine, and the design is still in use today. Buick now had an incredible product, but had spent all of his money and then some in the process of building it. He was desperately in need of an investor to help him get up and running. Eventually, one man emerged to take on Mr. Buick. His name was James Whiting.
James Whiting!
And he was now running the Flint Wagon Works. Whiting purchased Buick Motors for a whopping $10,000 and moved him to Flint. But Whiting wasn't interested in building a car. He wanted to use Buick's amazing engine design to help farmers, his main clientele, power their mills, pumps, and conveyors. Although relieved to have an investor, Buick's unwavering dream was to create the best automobile in the world. And he would soon devise a brilliant plan to get Whiting to give him a chance in making one.
Whiting,
Yes?
please, can I make a car? No. Please?
No.
Pretty please?
I said no.
Oh, come on, Whiting! Okay, you can make a car, but it must be stupendous.
And it surely was. This thing was passing every stress test they could throw at it and zooming past the competition at 25 miles per hour. Whiting knew he had something special, but as excited as he was, he also knew his limits. He was an aging man who didn't have the energy or the skills to sell the Buick on a massive scale. But he knew just the man who could. And so, he sent a telegram.
Telegram?
Hey, Durant, old buddy. I know you're partly retired from the carriage industry, but we have an incredible automobile you need to see here in Flint. Hurry back, please. Your pal, Whiting.
Durant had poor experiences with automobiles and wanted nothing to do with the loud, smelly, obnoxious contraptions. To him, they were nothing more than a nuisance. However, he agreed to come back to Flint to see what Whiting and Buick were cooking.
Well, let's see what this bucket of bolts can do.
Durant's first ride in a Buick spurred the same rush of excitement and vision of opportunity as the little two-wheeled road cart had nearly 20 years ago. He was in. But it wouldn't be cheap. Oh no, this was going to take some serious money to get up and running. So Durant immediately got to doing what he did best: selling. He was contacting friends, family, and colleagues to invest in his new venture, but it was his relationship with Durant and the Durant Carriage Company that really allowed him to hit the ground running. Durant traded factories and assets to Durant in exchange for Buick stock, which quickly gave him the ability to start mass-producing the Buick without needing liquid capital. Not to mention all of their existing distribution channels through the carriage industry, which allowed them to move product swiftly. Durant spent the next 4 years turning Buick into the best-selling automobile brand in the U.S. While Buick was growing at an astronomical rate, so was the sport of auto racing. It was becoming quite the national spectacle, and Buick had the finest racing team on the planet. The most decorated of the bunch was Louis Chevrolet, the Dale Earnhardt of his time. Although this may have been the first time his name would be stamped on a vehicle, it most certainly wouldn't be the last. Buick's incredible success convinced Durant to shift his gaze to a bigger picture, a holding company. Under it, he would craft a line of products to include various brands, just like he did with the carriage industry. And so, on September 16, 1908, General Motors was born. Under GM, Durant began buying up automobile manufacturers left and right, striding through the auto industry like a colossus, inspiring awe by the very enormity of his enterprise. It seemed like nothing could stand in his way. In another part of the country, bankers of the nation were gathered at a convention, panicking over the new automobile's seemingly endless need for capital, not to mention the increasing rate in which auto companies were going bankrupt. You see, at the time, big manufacturers like GM were few and far between. However, everyone and their brother were becoming assemblers, buying parts from various suppliers out of a catalog, slapping them together in their garages and stamping a logo on the side. Bankers had plenty of reason to fear the dangers of the emerging auto industry, especially with the large amount of capital they had invested in it. So they took action on all fronts. Just as GM was getting off to a record-breaking start, the bankers called in their $15 million loan. To say it was completely devastating would be an understatement. Durant countered and pleaded and finally came to an agreement. They would loan the money, but under one condition. The bank would have total control of GM. Durant, the founder, would have to lose his company in order to save it. That day, he signed away control of General Motors. It wasn't long before Durant was on to his next enterprise. He was going to make another car, another company, and take back General Motors in the process. Durant got the old gang back together, including Louis Chevrolet, who became not only the promotional face of the brand, but also the name. Within 2 years, this flashy car was outselling his last project, the Buick, not to mention every vehicle sold by GM combined. Although Durant was basking in the success of his latest creation, he never lost sight of the ultimate goal: taking back GM. Like a military coup, Durant organized all his old friends and colleagues. Together, they would help him buy back enough shares to once again take control of GM. Many would say that Durant was daring to the point of recklessness, and that he often preferred his own hunches to the methodical analysis of experts. Regardless, comrades looked up to him so greatly, and many were made millionaires because of him, that they would risk their own fortunes on his behalf. And they did. The day of the next shareholders' meeting, Durant walked in the door with his head high, for he was again the owner of GM. But his ownership wouldn't last long. The Durant style of management, essentially a one-man institution, wasn't well suited for the mature GM. Times had changed, and for GM to succeed, it needed a different type of leadership. The 1920s would mark the end of the Durant era and usher in the man who would invent the modern-day corporate structure, which had rules, regulations, and a tiered hierarchy that prevented any one person from having too much influence over the company's decisions. His name was Alfred Sloan. Throughout Sloan's leadership, our industry would not only change the very way we lived our lives, but it changed the face of the earth and connected everyone on it. It wasn't a one-man institution, but a large collective of innovators, entrepreneurs, and risk-takers. Although there have been plenty of bumps along the way, they paved the road for the journey we're on today. Their spirit of innovation lives within us, within our company, and it will continue to power us forward, far into the future.
Hey everybody, this is the Digital Asset Investor. I wanted to talk to you today about a couple of TV shows that you have got to watch. I think that we are in times that are very, very similar as XRP holders to the Industrial Revolution. And I was watching yesterday a part of one of the shows I wanted to tell you about. But in the past, I've seen the one that you're looking at right now called The Men Who Built America. But I was watching the second one, and I'll show you in a second, yesterday, and it gave me the idea to do this video for you today. But first, as long as I'm covering one, I'm going to cover both. It is very important that you see The Men Who Built America, because The Men Who Built America gives you a great snapshot into what goes on behind the scenes when there are high stakes games going on like there are in digital assets and cryptocurrencies right now. This is a digital revolution that's going on right before our eyes, and most of it's going on behind the scenes, but we're seeing a lot of it in our day-to-day news. We're not seeing probably what's really going on behind the scenes, but these shows on the History Channel really can give you a good look into the way that the people think and the things that are being done behind the scenes. And I'm going to give you an example of one of those today that I saw on one of these shows that I was watching yesterday. The Men Who Built America, I wanted to pull this up to give you a little more background. It focuses in on Cornelius Vanderbilt, John Rockefeller, Andrew Carnegie, J.P. Morgan, Thomas Edison, and Henry Ford, because all of those men pretty much changed entire industries. The Industrial Revolution involved the invention, the creation of the steel industry, the oil industry, the banking industry was created and transformed, the railroad industry and electricity, and then of course the creation of cars and the system of roads and the system of roads that we have in the United States. It was a time of tremendous change, and the stakes were so high that these men had to really be genius in the moves that they made and how they made them. So this is it's a multi-part series. Whatever you have to do, go watch it, because it'll really make you understand what you're a part of right now. And what I've said in the past, which is so great about this digital revolution, is that it's the one exception in history where common men, you didn't have to be the inventor or the corporate titan or the money man to take part in the revolution. This is the first revolution where average Joe can sit here behind their computer and take an active role in this revolution. And that's why I'm so excited, and that's why you should be so excited. You stand to have your lives changed just like I do. And that's what makes this so exciting, and that's why most of you are so excited, and you should be. But back to the show. So anyway, I want you to watch The Men Who Built America. It's fascinating. It's an unbelievably good docudrama about what happened and how America was built. But they did another one called The Cars That Made America, and that's what I was watching yesterday when I got the idea for this video. And all of the players, all the names that you see on these cars even today are the same names that were involved back then. And if you didn't know, there were thousands of car companies, but the Chevrolets and the Fords and the Dodges that exist today, those were players in the game back then in the 1900s that were actually they were doing for cars what Ripple is doing for digital assets today back then, and it's that exciting. But there was one story when they were talking about Henry Ford yesterday that really captured my attention, and I thought that the parallels to what we're seeing in digital assets today were so great that I needed to show it to you. So I looked up to make sure that they had the story exactly right. It was about the same as they had it on the History Channel. A few additions that I wanted to add to it. So I'm going to go through it real quick with you. And the gist of it, I'm going to give you kind of a summary. I'm not going to bore you to death with this, but it's pretty interesting. You've all heard of the car Dodge. Well, that company was started by the Dodge brothers, but before that, Henry Ford, the Dodge brothers were machinists, and Henry Ford had approached the Dodge brothers to come and build engines for Henry Ford, which they agreed to do. And in return, they got paid, but they also got 10% of the shares of Ford, and that happened in 1903. And then, after they had worked there for a while, the Dodge brothers had decided that they were going to sue Ford because they said that he was pricing the cars too low, and they sued for a dividend because they said that he was pricing the cars too low, and that there was all kinds of money that shareholders were not getting that they could get if he was pricing the cars appropriately. Well, the Dodges, they eventually won the case, and so the court ordered Ford to issue $20 million in dividend distributions, but it didn't have to happen right then. Ford had a period of time before they were actually going to have to make that distribution. And so here's where it gets interesting, and I want you to think about the things that are going on today, and I'll remind you after I finish this. But what's interesting is, at that time, so Ford got to thinking. He said, well, the company is going to have to do a $20 million, out here I've got these Dodge brothers who own 10% of my company now, and I'm fixing to have to we're going to have to do a $20 million distribution. And so I got two problems. I don't want to put all this money out and give it to these guys, and I want control of my company back. I think I want to say he had like 58% at this time. And so what he does is in 1918, he announces that he's going to resign as the president of Ford. Then in 1919, now understand the reason that Ford is doing this, he's intentionally trying to drive the Ford stock price down, even though he owns shares. So then in 1919, and he appointed his son the president, but he still knew that the stock price would go down. In 1919, Ford announces his intention to form a new car company, and it's going to compete with Ford. So imagine the guts this guy has. He's going to go off and start a new company that's going to compete with the company he created, and he does all of this to drop the stock price. So then the stock price drops, and then Ford, behind the scenes through brokers and bankers, goes and starts buying shares at the discounted price. So then, once he's bought all these shares at the discounted price, in July of 1919, the court ordered dividends were to be distributed. Well, guess who received $12 million of the $20 million in distribution because they're now a majority stock owner? Ford. The Dodge brothers, I believe, ended up with a couple of million. But now Ford had achieved, first of all, he got most of the money that was a lawsuit against his company. He received most of the money himself. Then he's back to being a majority shareholder in the company, and he's got the Dodges out of his way. I tell you that story because these are the kind of things that are being done right now in the high stakes game that Ripple is involved in. What this immediately reminds me of, and I'm not saying Ripple is doing it, not by any means, but I'm saying that there are major players in the game, and these major players are playing these kind of games that Ford would play because these are big, heavy hitters. The George Soroses of the world. These are the kind of games that these guys are going to play. Now, ultimately, XRP is going to go exactly where your gut and my gut tells us it's going to go because we've done the research. We know exactly what we're dealing with, and I'm going to show you just more and more evidence as we go along, but I'll show you a little before this video some new evidence of some new facts of what's coming and why. But I wanted to really let this sink in about Henry Ford, because the people in these kind of positions of power that are playing these high stakes games, this is how they think. You and I, a lot of us that are average people, we've never been put in a position where we have to think this way, or maybe we never could or would think this way. But this is part of the reason that those of you that get all nervous every time the price of XRP is going down, this is just part of the game. This is how it's played. This is part of what you have to go through to get to places in life that you couldn't imagine that you could have gotten. You have to man up. And these are the times that you man up, because these are just the games that are going to be played. They want to get all the weaklings out. So anyway, this stuff we've been seeing about all this security business and all, it's not a coincidence. It is not. And let this sink in. All these lawsuits about security and all this. Here's what's not a coincidence, and this is the final thing I'll say about this. These forward, I'll call them forward tactics. It is everything in my gut tells me that in an honest, above board world, you wouldn't be sitting in this twilight zone area where the SEC knows that the world's waiting on them to make a decision, but they won't make a decision. You wouldn't be sitting in this no man's land. This is by design. This is by someone who wants this to be vague. They want it to be vague for a reason, and some of us may not understand the reason, but these are strings that are being pulled, and they're being pulled intentionally. And so, but this is the way the world works, and the people who get on in the world are the people who man up, and they're able to accept risks like this. I grew up with a father who was in the home building business. This guy had to lay his head on his pillow owing a lot of money every day of his life. And a lot of people say they would like to have a lot of money, but they're not willing to put their head on the pillow and accept certain risks that someone like that's in a leveraged business is willing to accept. Everybody would say, I'd love to have what Henry Ford had or Vanderbilt had, but are they willing, or were they willing to go to bed at night with what would give most of us an ulcer? Because that's what this is. We're playing big boy games now. I plan on getting big boy rich off of XRP. And so this stuff doesn't bother me. I understand it. And maybe I wouldn't have understood it 10 years ago, but I understand it now. So I'm going to move on. And I want to show you further how big of a big boy game we're playing. This was from, and I don't know if I've ever told you to follow him before, but you've got to. Dr. T, and keep your politics out of this, but his name is @XRP Trump. I'm not getting into all that. But this guy provides really good information, and so you need to follow him. He's one of the top 3 guys. C3 Nick, Bank XRP, and XRP Trump are 3 of the best Twitter feeds, guys that get information that I would recommend with regard to XRP and Ripple. But yesterday, XRP Trump put this out, and it says, so now in our pipeline, this is Ashish Birla, okay? Something I want to mention about this Birla guy before I go further into this. Are you noticing? One thing that I'm noticing about the Ripple executives and the people at Ripple right now, I'm noticing a lot of swagger right now. I'm noticing guys that have something in their step and the way they talk. These are guys that are more confident than they were even a few months ago. And I want you to go to XRP Trump's thing, and I want you to watch this video, because this guy is just this side of being cocky. And that's a good sign for us, because these guys are not confident like this for no reason. They know where we're at. They know that we're fixing to take over the world. So it says, so now in our pipeline, we have probably 50% of the market in India either integrated onto Ripple or in the deal, in the pipeline to be signed. And guess what? We're going to take that back to Wells Fargo and say that there's not a better way to send into India than Ripple. So just imagine, you see Ripple, you don't drop names like Wells Fargo like that in those kind of terms unless you're starting to get a tremendous amount of leverage and the confidence that comes with that leverage. Because what he's saying right there is, hey, I can go to Wells Fargo and it's not my problem anymore, it's their problem. They're the ones that have the stress on them because they know what's coming now. That's what he's telling them right there. Well, let's look, just so you understand how big this India thing is. So now in our pipeline, probably 50% of the market in India. Well, look at this. The India market for remittances is the largest in the world. India was the largest remittance receiving country in the world, with migrant workers from the country sending home $69 billion in US dollars in 2017, according to a report which said remittances to the Asia Pacific region amounted to $256 billion last year. So this is huge, huge, huge. So I'm going to finish off this video by telling you two things. And those two things are, do not be surprised if when you hear those names of Vanderbilt, Edison, Rockefeller, J.P. Morgan, those kind of names, Henry Ford, don't be surprised, because here's what I believe is going to happen. I believe that you'll see Chris Larson's name in that same type of conversation one day, and I think you'll see Brad Garlinghouse's name in that same conversation as well. When the history books are written, that's how big what you are a part of is. And so don't forget that, and don't forget to put your big boy pants on, and don't get freaked out by all these little things that are happening. What matters is what your overall gut is telling you from all of the research that you've done and all the things, piece all the things you've heard together and what you've read and the deals that are signed and the things that are happening right now and the partners who have said they're going to use XRapid. This is what matters, not what people who are intentionally trying to manipulate you and the market and what your thoughts are. Pay attention to the big picture and what your common sense guided by your research is telling you. I am the digital asset investor. I am not an investment advisor. This is for entertainment purposes only.